Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going hunting for ZYGARDE in the Master League with BUZZWOLE. Now, BUZZWOLE, being the bug and fighting type Pokemon, is a complete wall to the standard ZYGARDE moveset of Crunch and Earthquake. This does allow BUZZWOLE to beat ZYGARDE in all even shield scenarios. It's also one of my favorite Pokemon, so I figured, what better than to run some BUZZWOLE and see if we can make some ZYGARDEs have an absolutely terrible day. This is more of a team for fun than for climbing, but the battles were quite enjoyable. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and let's go hunting for ZYGARDE. Hopping into the first match, and there it is, Shadow Tyranitar versus ZYGARDE. Of course, Tyranitar, not really what I want to see going up against ZYGARDE, so I am going to save switch into Zacian, and my opponent is going to respond with Solgaleo. The good news is I had to bait this out. Solgaleo, of course, due to having Fire Spin and Psychic Fangs, does very well into the BUZZWOLE, but I've been able to lure it out with the Zacian and deal some very nice chip damage here with the back-to-back Wild Charges. The Wild Charge is going to connect, Solgaleo is going to get a big farm down. I'm going to send in the Shadow Tyranitar to absorb this energy. As Tyranitar, not going to have a massive amount of play going up against the ZYGARDE, I have to trust in BUZZWOLE. And in the back, opponent, they have Rhyperior, and this is suddenly looking pretty good for me. I'm firing off the lunge is going to be no shielded by my opponent fires off their energy on alignment. This will be the Breaking Swipe connects, it does not get the debuff, the opponent throwing on bad timing is going to cost them as they do not make it to their next charge move, and now they only have one Pokemon left. There is nothing to stop BUZZWOLE from debuffing their attack again and again and again. Even though I do fully resist this energy, I am going to be shielding because I'm going to keep applying these debuffs, making their charge attacks do less and less damage. Lunge number 2 is going to connect. The ZYGARDE now below half health. ZYGARDE firing off more energy, and I'm double shielding here. A Crunch would not be enough to knock out here since I have heavily debuffed it, but I may as well get as many lunge debuffs as I possibly can. Opponent starting to shield. BUZZWOLE continuing to farm. I'm going to bank the superpower, send in the Shadow Tyranitar, and make it to the Brutal Swing. And this Brutal Swing means game over for the opponent. They're forced to fire off energy here, and I have the superpower banked on the BUZZWOLE. Earthquake picks up the knockout, but I have the charge attack stored on the BUZZWOLE. Superpower takes down the ZYGARDE, and that is a good game. The tough leads continue in the next match, Shadow Tyranitar versus Dialga. Same game plan as the ZYGARDE lead. I'm going to save switch into the Zacian. This time my opponent is choosing to stay in here. Dialga, of course, does have Iron Head, so it can hit back for super effective damage. Interestingly enough, I am choosing not to run close combat, as with Play Rough, I can still two-shot the Dialga, but it just gives me a lot more flexibility on the save switch. Opponent is going to commit the shield. They've seen Play Rough, so they're probably not expecting me to also have Wild Charge. The Wild Charge connects, doing big damage to the Ho-Oh. I send in the Tyranitar immediately, because I know that our switch clocks are heavily misaligned. The Brave Bird will connect, I'm going to get the farm down, and now when they send in Dialga, my switch clock is up so I can send in the BUZZWOLE, but they're still going to be stuck since they stayed in that initial matchup. And now I can just go for massive counter damage with the BUZZWOLE. I'm not even throwing a charge attack here. I'm just going to shield, go for as much energy as possible, and look for the full counter down. Opponent is not able to save the Dialga. I get the full farm down. In the back, it's Kyogre, and this game is over. Taking advantage of the desync switch timers is going to win me this game, as again, the opponent is left with only one Pokemon. They have no way to reset these debuffs, and BUZZWOLE is just applying so much pressure. Their attack has been double debuffed. The superpower will force the shield. I can switch in the Tyranitar. Those waterfalls now do absolutely nothing, and the opponent resigns the match. Moving into the next match, leading Shadow Tyranitar into Solgaleo. Now this is not a fantastic lead for me, as unfortunately we pace at the same duration, but my opponent is going to win charge attack priority, and the Iron Head hits for massive damage. I'm hoping that since I no-shielded, my opponent will also no-shield, but they do end up protecting the Solgaleo, and that's a problem for me. I'm farming up, going for the Brutal Swing. Again, I do lose charge attack priority, and this is really not great. I shield up, opponent goes for a Psychic Fangs. It feels terrible to shield a Psychic Fangs on a Dark type. The Brutal Swing does get shielded. I decide to aggressively switch into the Zacian. Zacian farming up quite a lot of energy here. I know that I am going to be hit with an Iron Head, so I decide to commit a shield. Let's see what my opponent wants to do. They're actually staying in here, and I'm going to be able to fire off the Wild Charge. This will not knock out, but it is going to get my opponent very low. I continue to farm. Opponent tries to go for a Wild Charge catch onto the Giratina, but now, since I have Play Rough, I'm in a pretty nice position. I'm still healthy enough where a Shadow Sneak or an Ancient Power will not be able to knock out. Giratina altered, of course, quite bulky, but does not hit hard at all, and I'm able to make it to the last second Play Rough. Now, Play Rough is going to be able to pick up the knockout there, and my opponent, are they going to send in the Solgaleo, or will we see that final Pokemon? Opponent is going to send in ZYGARDE. I immediately switch into Buzzwole, and Buzzwole, I know, does win the Zero Shield here. I'm firing off the Lunge. Lunge is going to connect. Opponent is going to reset the debuff by sending in the Solgaleo. And by resetting the debuff, that might allow them to win this matchup. They go for the Crunch, and they do get the debuff as well. That is quite unfortunate. I'm going to be able to lower their attack once again with the Lunge, but they have lowered my defense. I continue to farm. They're firing off more energy here. They're going to go for the Crunch. Crunch is going to connect. They lower my defense another time. The RNG in my opponent's favor in this game. I make it to the Superpower, and that gets them low. I send in the Tyranitar, and then I make a potentially catastrophic mistake. I switch into the Zacian. The game ends at a tie. If I had just stayed in, I could have won, but unfortunately, by making a catch, the game actually goes from a win to a tie. We lead once again into a ZYGARDE, so I'm going to save switch into Zacian. But this time, my opponent is going to send in Ho-Oh. Now, Ho-Oh, definitely not going to be a fan of the Wild Charge. Opponent is going to shield, and then they do something interesting. They end up throwing on alignment here, and that gives me an entire quick attack for free. I can now throw 2 quick attacks, fire off another Wild Charge, and this Wild Charge is going to connect, dealing massive damage to the Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh firing off another charge move. I do really want switch here, so I'm going to shield up the Brave Bird, and then I am going to get a farm down, which is incredibly nice. They send in the ZYGARDE, and I can fire off the Play Rough. Now, Play Rough is going to connect onto the ZYGARDE. ZYGARDE tanking that surprisingly well, and I'm sending in the Buzzwole. And as we know, Buzzwole does quite well here. My opponent farming up a ton of energy, and I'm firing off this Lunge. Lunge is going to connect into the ZYGARDE. It doesn't matter what they throw here, Crunch or Earthquake. They go for the Earthquake. That does absolutely nothing. ZYGARDE in an incredibly tough spot. They're able to make it to the last second charge attack here. It is going to be the Crunch. If they're staying in, they're probably weak to Buzzwole in the back, and they are. It's Dialga. I'm going for the Lunge bait here. I get the shield, and I go for the Superpower. That Lunge bait was extremely important. The reason being is that I need to be able to survive an Iron Head. And thanks to the debuff from the Lunge, as we're going to see here, Iron Head will not be enough to knock out. The Iron Head connects, but due to the debuff, Shadow Tyranitar is able to hang on and make it to the Brutal Swing. And Brutal Swing is going to pick up the win. We see a very tricky lead in the next match, Shadow Tyranitar versus Therian Landorus. We're going to see a lot more Landorus once it does get access to Sandsear Storm in a week or two, but in the meantime here, it is a bit of an unusual sighting. I try and catch a Superpower, but unfortunately my opponent is just going to go for the Stone Edge. I'm farming up a lot of energy, they're going to re-bank a Superpower for later, and they're going to send in their own Zacian. I'm firing off the Wild Charge. Wild Charge is going to connect. I'm able to make it to Wild Charge number 2, and it looks like that I did win Charge Attack priority. The Wild Charge is going to connect. Unfortunately, it's not going to be enough to knock out, but at this point, I'm kind of okay with that. I'm going to get some nice farm with the Tyranitar, and I leave with the Charge Attack loaded if they send in the Landorus. Opponent in the back. Oh no, they have Dialga. And there's something that the Therian Landorus Dialga core really does not appreciate, and that is Buzzwole. As Buzzwole, of course, is going to be able to hit the Dialga for super effective damage, as we see Buzzwole flex in there and force Landorus to go for Stone Edge, and Landorus has absolutely zero fast move pressure here, so I can go for the Lunge, and now I can just fully commit to the farm down. In hindsight, I should shield this move, as my opponent was not going to be able to get to a second Stone Edge, and after they land this Stone Edge, I'm a bit worried that once they land the Superpower, I'm in a range where Dialga could farm me down, so I end up using my shields very inefficiently here, as I end up shielding a resisted move. I'm now firing off the Lunge, opponent is going to be shielding that up, At this point, my opponent recognizes they do not have a win con, and they resign the match. Moving into the next match, Shadow Tyranitar greeted once again by a Zygarde lead. They save switch into Ho-Oh. I go for the wild charge. I thought with the switch I was throwing on good timing, but it ends up being on alignment, and there is no more crushing feeling in the game than throwing on alignment versus an Incinerate user and seeing the Incinerate sneak through. In that particular instance, I followed up in this match by throwing on alignment again, but in this instance, it forces a CMP tie, so I'm going to be able to get some nice farm on the Shadow Tyranitar, but man, seeing that Incinerate sneak through was extremely painful. I'm going to send in the BUZZWOLE. I do have a shield advantage here, which is quite nice, and I know that I can tank whatever they throw. They go for the Earthquake. BUZZWOLE, completely unfazed by that damage, is going to be firing off the Lunge. Lunge is going to connect. In the back, it's Zacian, and Zacian, honestly, the opponent could have switched this in quite a bit sooner. I guess they were just wanting to tank energy before switching from the BUZZWOLE, but the thing is, by staying in to tank the energy, they have desynced the switch timers. The Lunge is going to connect. I'm just going to continue to apply pressure here and fire off the Superpower. This does more damage than a Lunge. The Superpower connects. I switch into the Tyranitar, and I'm just looking for a smackdown farm down. Opponent is going to go for the play rough. Do they make the next charge move? They do not. The Smackdown picks up the KO. Back in comes the Zygarde. The Smackdowns, of course, are resisted here, but Brutal Swing is a pretty nice charge move. Opponent forced to burn a shield. I'm able to make it to another Brutal Swing, and this will do sizable damage even onto the bulky Zygarde. Well, you know what? I will rephrase. Not sizable damage per se. It is a Zygarde, but it still does decent damage, and I can send in the BUZZWOLE. BUZZWOLE making it to a Superpower, so despite the catastrophic mistake of throwing on alignment versus Incinerate to start off the game, we're able to take that win. The tough leads continue for Shadow Tyranitar in the next match as I lead into Rhyperior. Man, apparently today was not the day to lead Shadow Tyranitar, as I feel like Tyranitar has just lost leads like crazy so far. I'm able to grab his shield with a play rough, which is quite nice. Opponent does have enough for the Rock Wrecker. I'm going to let this through. That does quite a lot of damage. Opponent going to send in Dialga. Can I make it to the play rough? No, I cannot. At this point, it doesn't seem like my Shadow Tyranitar has a lot of value, so I'm just going to bring it in versus the Dialga. I could send in the BUZZWOLE, but at this point, I'm expecting they probably have another Pokemon in back that is good against the Tyranitar, so I'm just going to try and get whatever value that I can out of it. They're eventually going to be firing off the Iron Head, and I'm going to try and go for a farm down here with the BUZZWOLE, hoping that I can get the farm down before they make a move, but I cannot. The Dialga, very low HP, but they hang on and make the Iron Head. And now, a potential concern is them bringing in Rhyperior, and Rhyperior being able to apply a debuff that I'm unable to reset because I only have one Pokemon left. Thankfully, the Breaking Swipe does not debuff. A little bit of luck goes my way. The Lunge is going to connect. I continue to farm. Rhyperior cannot get to the move. What's in back? It's Kyogre. This is an okay matchup for BUZZWOLE. BUZZWOLE does pretty okay neutrally here, but I've already taken quite a lot of damage on the BUZZWOLE. I continue to farm up with the BUZZWOLE. I'm going for another Lunge. This Lunge is going to be getting them quite low. The opponent is going to no-shield. It's a race. Counter versus Waterfall, and on 1 HP, Kyogre takes that game. Hopping into the final match, and what do you know, another terrible lead for Shadow Tyranitar as I lead into Dialga. I'm going to save switch into the Zacian. Opponent is going to send in Kyogre, and I do have a pretty nice energy advantage here. I'm going to fire off the Wild Charge. I'm one off the back-to-back, and this forces my opponent to throw on alignment, because if they try and go for good timing, I can make it to a second Wild Charge and force a shield from them. But in throwing on alignment, they give me a free quick attack, which is very helpful here. My opponent is going to shield. This time, I am going to be able to make it to a second Wild Charge, and this is going to force both shields from my opponent. Given the opportunity to take switch advantage, I absolutely will, because I am very aware of the fact that that Dialga will absolutely crush my poor Tyranitar, and they have a Ho-Oh in the back Oh my goodness, this is terrific. They send back in the Dialga, quick switch into the Buzzwole, making it to the Superpower. Superpower is going to pick up the knockout. I'm now debuffed. These Incinerates are tearing through the Buzzwole. That Incinerate just barely does not KO, and Buzzwole makes it to the Lunge. The Lunge is double resisted. It does almost no damage, but of course, it comes with that guaranteed attack drop. And Ho-Oh, even though the charge attacks are resisted here, can still output quite a lot of damage. So Buzzwole, able to make it to that last second Lunge, ends up being clutch, as the Sacred Fire plus the Brave Bird is not enough to KO Tyranitar. All in all, I had a lot of fun getting to run this team. I was able to go slightly positive with it around Legend Elo, but as I mentioned at the start, this is not a team that I would recommend for climbing. It's more so just a team for fun, and a team that I felt like allowed me to use Buzzwole, because Buzzwole can be a very fun core breaker. A lot of teams run ABA weak to fighting because there aren't really any very strong fighters in the Master League. We of course see the occasional Terrakion, the occasional Buzzwole, but outside of that, neither one of those Pokemon see a lot of consistent play, so a lot of teams do run very weak to the fighters, but you will also sometimes run into teams like, let's say, Giratina Double Fairy, where the Buzzwole just has nowhere to go. So this team was structured to try and basically get the most out of Buzzwole possible, because Buzzwole is a very funny hard counter to energy from ZYGARDE. So overall, I did have quite a lot of fun with the team, and as you could see, at High Elo Master League, the ZYGARDEs are everywhere. You cannot escape them. So getting to make some ZYGARDEs, have a pretty rough day, definitely was enjoyable. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support guys provide is sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.